1 second, the cafe was full of ordinary Saturday morning noise, espresso machines hissing, silverware clinking, a dozen overlapping conversations rising and falling like a tide. The next second, every single sound stopped. Victoria Stanton's palm had connected with the left side of Marcus Jackson's face so hard that the people nearest to them physically flinched. A woman at the counter dropped her cup. A child at the window table went completely still, sensing something adults around her did not yet have words for. Marcus didn't move. He stood there with his daughter, pressed against his chest, one large, weathered hand curved protectively around the back of her small head, shielding her from something far worse than a slap. He didn't stagger. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned his head back, slowly, deliberately, and looked at Victoria with eyes so cold and so utterly empty of surprise that several witnesses would later say it was the most unsettling thing they had ever seen. Then Victoria's bodyguard stepped forward to do his job. He got within 3 feet of Marcus, looked at the long, pale scar running down the left side of the man's face, and stopped dead. The color drained from him completely. He took 1 step back. What happened over the next few hours would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness, humility, and second chances can change the world, please take a moment to like this video. Comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to the Aura Fables for more unforgettable stories. Marcus Jackson woke at 6:15 every Saturday morning without an alarm. It was not a habit he had chosen so much as one his body had refused to release. 15 years out of the army, and he still couldn't sleep past dawn. He didn't fight it anymore. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet, and let himself listen to the particular stillness of the apartment before the rest of the world caught up to him. By 7, Ava was awake. He always knew the exact moment she crossed from sleep into waking, because the entire apartment shifted a small 7-year-old seismic event announced by feet hitting the floor, a drawer opening and closing 3 times in quick succession. And then his daughter's small silhouette in the kitchen doorway, wearing mismatched socks and an expression of total seriousness. "Is it a park day?" she asked, the way she asked every Saturday. "It's a park day," he answered, the way he answered every Saturday. She allowed herself exactly 1 second of visible joy before disappearing to get dressed. Marcus watched her go and felt a quiet happiness settle in his chest, the kind that never announced itself, the kind that simply stayed. He was not a complicated man to look at, tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his early 40s, with close-cropped hair and a face that had been weathered rather than aged. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and dark jeans, owned nothing that cost more than it needed to. He drove a used truck, lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, and worked 3 days a week doing logistics consulting for a mid-sized shipping company, enough to keep the lights on, enough to be home when his daughter needed him. The scar ran from his left temple, down along the curve of his jaw, a long, pale ridge of healed tissue that pulled faintly at the corner of his eye when he smiled. People noticed it. They always did. Some asked. Most didn't. He never explained it. He had learned long ago that silence itself was usually enough to end the questions. He never talked about where it came from. He never talked about a great many things. By 8:30, they walked through the door of a cafe called Groundwork. On the corner of 5th and Meridian, their standing Saturday ritual before the park. A tradition that had begun the winter after his wife died and had not been broken once in 3 years. Ava held his hand and told him, in great and serious detail, about a drawing she had made at school of a horse that admittedly looked more like a dog. Marcus listened to every single word, the way he always did. The cafe was busy the way it always was on Saturdays, every table taken, a line curling back from the counter, the smell of fresh bread mingling with dark roast coffee. Marcus ordered his usual black coffee. Ava got her usual hot chocolate. They found a small table near the window, and for a few minutes everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. Then Ava, mid-sentence about the horse that looked like a dog, slid off her chair to point at something on the chalkboard menu. She turned too fast. The cup tilted from her small hand in a slow, inevitable arc that Marcus was half a second too late to catch. It struck the floor and splashed upward in a wide fan, landing squarely across the shoes of the woman standing directly behind her. That woman was Victoria Stanton, one of the wealthiest people in the city, dressed in a way that made the rest of the cafe look underdressed by comparison. She looked down at her ruined shoes. She looked at Ava, still on the floor, eyes already filling with tears, and her voice, when it came, was not loud. It was worse than loud, precise, deliberate, each word placed for maximum effect. What is wrong with you? Do you have any idea what these cost? Where are your parents, letting a child run wild in a public place like this? Ava began to cry. Marcus was out of his chair before Victoria finished her sentence. He crossed to his daughter in 4 steps, crouched beside her, checked her knees and hands for injury. There were none, and pulled her gently upright, one hand steady on her shoulder. Only then did he look at Victoria. "She's 7, he said quietly, as she tripped. Then, to Ava, "Are you hurt?" Ava shook her head, pressing her face into his side. "Then we're going to get you cleaned up. Back to Victoria. I'll pay for the cleaning. But I'd like you to apologize to my daughter." Victoria looked at him as though he'd said something absurd. "Apologize? Your daughter just destroyed a pair of shoes that cost more than you probably make in a month." "I'm not apologizing for pointing that out. She's a child," Marcus said. "She made a mistake. It's different from doing something wrong. I don't need a lesson in child development from you." She glanced around. The cafe with the ease of someone who had never once worried about an audience. "Take your daughter home and teach her how to behave in public." Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't move closer. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said. "Please apologize to my daughter." Something tightened behind Victoria's eyes, the look of a woman who had not been spoken to this way in a very long time and found the experience genuinely intolerable. "You have no idea who you're talking to," she said, her voice dropping half a register. "I have personal relationships with 3 members of the city council, the deputy chief of police, and 2 senior judges. I make one phone call, and you won't just lose this argument, you'll lose custody of that child before the week is out. Child Protective Services takes anonymous tips very seriously." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ava heard them. Marcus felt her go rigid against his side, her small fingers gripping his hand with both of hers. She looked up at him with an expression of pure, uncomplicated fear. Marcus looked back at Victoria. He didn't move. Victoria made the first call before he could say another word. She stepped back, pulled out her phone with practiced ease, and issued instructions rather than requests, words like attorney, harassment, and documentation, drifting across the silent room. When she finished, she looked at him with something close to satisfaction. "My attorney will be here in 20 minutes. You can also expect a call from Child Protective Services within the hour. I have a contact there. It's very thorough." At the counter, the staff had frozen. Barista stood motionless with a milk pitcher in her hand. Near the window, 3 customers already had their phones out, 1 filming, 2 texting rapidly. Marcus stood exactly where he had been standing. Afana, no longer crying, had both arms wrapped around his waist, communicating without words that she did not want him to move. "You done?" Marcus asked. Victoria blinked a small crack in her composure. "I beg your pardon. You made your calls. You said what you wanted to say. I'm still here. My daughter is still here. I'm still asking you to apologize to her." Victoria studied him for a long moment, the way one might study a structural problem with no obvious source. Then something hardened behind her eyes, and she stepped forward. The slap came without warning. Her hand swung in a sharp arc and connected with the left side of his face, the crack cutting through the room like a blade. The cafe fell into complete silence, not the partial hush of before, but the kind of silence that falls when something happens that no one present knows how to process. Ava did not cry this time. She went still, watching her father with an expression that was not fear, but something closer to waiting, as though she understood beneath words that what happened next mattered more than anything before it. Marcus did not stagger. He brought his head back slowly, deliberately, and looked at Victoria with a stillness that seemed to come from somewhere far deeper than the present moment. From the door, Bradley moved to the bodyguard, mid-50s, built with the physical economy of a man who had spent a lifetime under professional discipline. He crossed the floor in long strides, positioning himself between his employer and Marcus, ready to do exactly what he was paid to do. Then he saw the scar. The pale ridge running from temple to jaw, the unmistakable, irregular shape left by fragmented metal, traveling at high velocity. Bradley had seen that exact scar once before, on the night of March 14, 2009. in a burning building outside Kandahar. On the face of a soldier who had come back through a collapsing doorway a second time to pull him out by his vest while his own face was bleeding, Bradley stopped. The professional momentum carrying him across the room simply died. He stood 3 feet away and did not move, the color draining out of him in a single wave. "I can't," he said, barely above a murmur, but the room was quiet enough that it carried to every table. "I can't do this. Not to this man. Bradley." Victoria's voice held the edge of someone who had never had to repeat herself to an employee. "What are you talking about? Do your job." He didn't look at her. "Ma'am, I need you to understand something then." To the room, in a voice steadier than his face looked, "Delta Force. 2nd Battalion, Special Forces Group, Kandahar Province, March 14th, 2009. The word stopped. Victoria mid-sentence. "There was a compound," Bradley continued, speaking now to the whole room. "A hostage extraction. 6-man team. The building was booby-trapped. We didn't know until the first device went off. 3 of us got out clean. 2 were confirmed down. I was trapped on the 2nd floor. Ceiling collapsed. Both exits blocked. The whole structure was burning around me. Maybe 4 minutes before the smoke alone killed me." He paused, jaw working. "He came back in the first time and got Davis out, broken leg, couldn't move on his own. Carried him out through a doorway already on fire. Then he went back in. For me, the building was coming down, the mission was technically complete, and he went back anyway. The 2nd device detonated while he was on the stairs. That's where the scar came from. He was still moving when it went off. He got to me, got me to the window, got me out." He exhaled. "Never saw him again. His records were classified above my clearance. I didn't even know his name until 6 months later." A gray-haired man in his 60s, seated alone in the corner, rose slowly to his feet, looked at Marcus, and gave one single, deliberate nod. Marcus nodded back. "This is absurd," Victoria said, her voice losing some of its precision. "You're telling me this man is some kind of—" "I'm telling you what I saw," Bradley said, finally facing her. "I have the medical records. I have the incident report. I have a scar on my own side that matches the exit point of the same device that did that to his face. I'm not making anything up." Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time that morning, she had nothing to say. A woman named Rachel, seated behind Victoria, had been filming for 11 minutes the argument. The threats, the slap, Bradley's testimony, all of it, already uploading across 3 platforms before Bradley finished his last sentence. Phones around the cafe began lighting up in a rapid, cascading chime. Victoria looked around at them, and for the first time her expression shifted into something close to genuine alarm. 2 police officers walked in, unhurried, and moved toward the center of the room. Sergeant Doyle looked at Marcus, then Bradley, then Victoria. "We got a call from the staff. Anybody want to tell me what happened?" Rachel stood and turned her phone around. "I have the whole thing on video." Doyle watched it in silence, then looked at Victoria. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside with me. You're not being arrested, but based on the video evidence in this room, you may be subject to a charge of simple assault." Victoria looked at Doyle. She looked at Bradley, eyes on the floor. She looked at Marcus, unmoved, unchanged, still present. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. Nobody looked away. The only sound was her heels against the tile and the door swinging open into the morning light. Ava looked up at her father. "Daddy, are you okay?" Marcus crouched down and held her. "Day, baby. I'm okay." By sundown, the video had 2 million views. By midnight, for national news outlets had picked it up. By Sunday, Marcus Jackson's name was being spoken in conversations across the country that he had no part in and no control over. He had turned his phone off in the cafe parking lot and did not turn it back on for 3 days. Instead, he drove to the park. They were 40 minutes late, but the swings were still there, and Ava ran ahead of him down the path the way she always did, and they stayed for 2 hours. By Monday, the consequences for Victoria arrived in organized waves. Her board called an emergency session. Corporate partners issued careful statements of distance. By Tuesday, she had been placed on a voluntary leave of absence, the kind that came with a board resolution and no real choice attached. Her attorneys called it a private dispute misrepresented by selective editing. That statement lasted 6 hours, until the full, unedited recording surfaced. Marcus knew none of it in real time. What he knew was Ava. She didn't mention the cafe on Saturday or Sunday. Didn't push. On Sunday night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, she finally asked, "Daddy, have you ever been scared?" "Yeah," he said. "Lots of times." "What did you do?" "I did what needed doing anyway. Being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you keep going while you're scared." She considered this, filed it away the way she did with things that mattered, and said, "Okay." The hearing came 6 weeks later. Victoria arrived alone. One attorney, no bodyguard. Bradley had resigned the Monday after the cafe. Her attorney delivered a statement that was precise and almost entirely beside the point. When the presiding officer asked if she wished to add anything, Victoria stood on her own. "I watched the video many times," she said, facing Marcus directly. "I told myself the context was missing. The people didn't understand. I was lying to myself. I said things to you and your daughter designed to cause harm. Then I hit you, in front of your child, in front of a room full of people. There is no version of that which is defensible. I'm sorry, not because it's the appropriate thing to say, but because it's true, and I don't have anything else worth saying." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, not forgiveness, not absolution, simply acknowledgement that her words had been received. The judgment was entered. Financial restitution, a formal injunction, a permanent mark on her professional record. She paid it without negotiating. 4 months later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter and wrapped in tissue. A hardcover coloring book of horses, the exact one Ava had stood transfixed by outside a bookstore window weeks earlier. The one Marcus had meant to go back for. Victoria had been in that same store, asked what children loved most, and been told about a little girl who'd stared at that window for almost a full minute. She bought it without hesitation. Marcus read the letter twice, then placed it in the drawer where he kept the things that mattered: Ava's birth certificate, his discharge papers, a photograph of his late wife. When Ava found the book and asked who had sent it, he said only, "Someone who's trying to be better." She asked if they were doing okay. "I think so," he said. "I think they're working on it." That afternoon, the light fell across the kitchen table, across Ava's hands as she filled in the outline of a horse in burnt orange, tongue pressed to her lip in concentration. The scar on Marcus's face caught the light the way it always did, the mark of a night in a burning building. Far from this ordinary, unrepeatable afternoon, he didn't think about Kandahar. He watched his daughter draw and thought about nothing at all. Power can make people feared, but character is what makes them remembered. Every person carries invisible battles, and true greatness is never measured by title or wealth or the room you command. It is measured quietly and permanently by the choices you make when no one is applauding you for them. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe.